Hello, I'm Derek Draper.
And I'm Eloa, and we're here to talk about Chapter 6 today of Create Space, which is Space to Relate. As with other episodes, I will begin by reading the lesson, and then Derek, you're going to share the story of, who is it today? Amir.
Amir, right, okay.
So the lesson is, however many strengths you have, you must create the space to build rich relationships to be truly successful. And I think Amir's story really explains this.
So this is my favourite story. It's the longest story, but I think there's a lot in it. And Amir, in the story, is a very high-powered lawyer. Now, as ever, it's changed the reality of who this person actually was, and he's a sort of combination of several people. But the psychological essence was the guy in the book, right? And he expected he was going to be made the managing partner of his big city law firm, and there was a problem, and the problem was basically everybody respected him, everybody thought he was brilliant at his job, everyone was slightly scared of him, which was sort of okay in that environment, but crucially, hardly anyone liked him, right? And it's also the only story, I think, where there's very bad swear words, because that's how he communicated. So I had to kind of reflect that, right? Or the guy who it was based on communicated. It's all about how Amir was let down in his early life around relationships and authority figures, his mum and his dad in a way, right? And that he therefore had a sort of, you might not like me and you're going to let me down. I can't trust you, so I'll put the wall up first, right? And of course, you especially in a big city law firm or a bank or somewhere, you can get away with that for quite a while if you're a rainmaker, as they put it, if you bring the money in. But if you want to be the actual leader of that organisation, that's when people say, well, hang on, we know he's brilliant at doing what he does, but we don't really want him to be our leader, right? And so he was sent to me by the current managing partner to see if I could work with him and change this. And there was quite a radical change, and that reflects the real life story, right? There was quite a radical change, all revolving around a woman who I think is called Norma and some photos of her dogs, hence the title. So yeah, and the lesson is exactly what you just read out, right? It's that he had to start to build relationships with people at work, and in his defence, he had a few good friends who he was really close to. He had, he's actually very close to his wife and his family. He carved out this little space where he could be loving, but boy, was he not bringing that to work, right? Clients got showered with attention sometimes and very charming. He had a little crew at work, mainly men, many boys, but I say boys, young men who sort of admired him. But that's not enough, right? He and even they didn't really want him to be the leader, it turned out, right? I was very reminded of a fantastic line in the program Billions. We actually have a blog about billions on our CDP website, which people can check out, cdp.consulting, because in a way, some of what we do as leadership psychologists is what Wendy Rose does in Billions, right? And there's a fantastic line where Axe, the main character, who, if people don't know it, is a kind of, really successful hedge fund billionaire in New York, says to his wife, the only people that matter to him are his wife and his two kids, and everyone else is cannon fodder, is the phrase he uses. And when I saw that on telly one night, I thought, well, that's Amir. That's exactly what Amir thought,
And it really comes down to Amir's way of relating to the world, and as you talk about a lot, how that kind of connects back and stemmed from his early experiences. When you worked with him, there were two key tools that you used. The first one was the Stakeholder Mapping, and the second was the Professional Intimacy Model. Can you talk us through them?
Yeah, so people probably, what I find about Stakeholder Mapping is people have heard of it, and most people have done it if you're a kind of executive in a big business. But when I say done it, it means they kind of, saw it on a PowerPoint slide and were asked to think about it for 10 minutes. I've rarely met anyone who's actually done it, right? And yet it's a very simple and incredibly powerful thing. So I won't go into great detail here, right? We might do another episode maybe on stakeholder mapping in the future. But essentially, it's that idea that you get a piece of paper, you put you in the middle, and then you think, well, who are the people that I should have a good relationship with in order to function well at work, right? And when people initially do that, when I'm with them, they will put the sort of first circle of people, and then I ask for two things on a slightly deeper level. One is, well, what out of 0 to 10 do you want your relationship to be? Should your relationship be with those people, right? So, the receptionist or the security guard that comes in at night, right? You don't necessarily have to have a 10 out of 10 relationship with, but it could be a 4 out of 5, a 4 or 5 out of 10. Your boss, you kind of should have a good relationship with, your peers, right? But then I asked them to look at an outer circle of people that they hadn't thought of, right? And to maybe anticipate something. Classic example is some people who are running business units might not have that much to do with financial control until the end of the year, right? Now, I've worked with people who will make sure they've taken the financial controller out for a cup of coffee at the beginning of the year when no one's interested in them, and become a sort of friend, right? And boy, does it help them at the end of the year when the guy's like knocking on the door saying, what's this, what's that, right? They have this working relationship. And one of the things that came up with EMEA, and which I think is very important for people who are less relational and maybe a bit introverted, right? Which I am actually, despite being able to sit here and, do this, which is that introverted people tend to think that relationships are a bottomless pit, right? That's what Amir thought, because he had that actually early on in his life, right? They're not. And it's amazing how much you can do with a cup of coffee, right? Or a 2-minute chat in the car park, right? It's not that you're then going to have lunch with this person every day, right? And you can set boundaries, which is something we'll maybe talk about later, So really important to kind of track your stakeholders in a methodical way, right? Because otherwise you'll forget, right? And somebody suddenly will loom into horizon, one of your peers who you've kind of not really made any effort with for months, and you need at that moment a good relationship. So what's your relationship? What do you want the relationship to be, 0 to 10? Where is it now? And then a plan for moving it up. And the point I'm trying to make is that the plan needn't be 20 lunches, right, or 5 dinners. It could be a cup of coffee.
I think it's being tuned into those opportunities and just recognising that there is a chance to say hello to the person on reception when you come in the morning, or a chance just to have a quick conversation with somebody in a lift. You don't have to do that thing of standing in silence. And it's taking those little moments and building relationship. And building allies, that's the word that when you talked about a kind of working relationship, I was thinking of the word allies.
That's right.
What about the professional intimacy model that you developed?
Oh, yeah. So well, in fact, just before we go on to that, you've triggered a memory of a story which is in the book, right? Where, well, 2 things, actually. So I used to work for a company called YSC, which is a sort of global leadership consultancy. And the main thing they do, which we also do at CDP, is half-day assessments to see whether people are suitable for certain jobs or not, right? But Gurnick Baines and Ken Rowe, who founded that company, used to hide behind reception. There was like a mirror, right? A mirrored window. And they'd watch the person come in, right? And Ken used to say, now he was kind of joking, right? But he also had a point, which was that if you watch the person for 5 minutes in the waiting room, you could write the assessment, right? Now, they never did, right? But it gave them valuable information about the person, right? And you have to be careful, because if you're really nervous, you might not say hello, right, to the receptionist, but actually normally you do, right? But that tells you that someone's nervous. So it's all data that they were gathering,
And even gathering data about how somebody functions when they're nervous is interesting, because there might be a development area in there.
That's right.
How do you function under anxiety or under stress or in those kind of situations? Because at more senior levels of leadership, you're going to be nervous. You're going to be doing things that are out of your comfort zone.
That's right.
And so you need to really be in charge of how you operate rather than at the mercy of it.
Yeah, that's right.
And then what was the other
well,
story?
the other story was that at YSC there was kind of 4 floors, and each floor was similar. It had a kind of central area where there was certain PAs and a bit of a breakout area, and then consulting rooms all around the edges. There's a bit like sort of 8 rooms that by definition had to be kind of soundproof because it's very private, personal work. And the 2 rooms at either end of the square, if you like, were really big, right, and had like better furniture and more windows. And I used to often get those rooms, right? And people say, well, why is Derek getting those rooms all the time, right? Now, the answer was that every time I went on a business trip, I would get a little trinket for the receptionist, right? So I remember I got a little carved elephant when I went to Kenya once. I went to Saudi Arabia and got one of this kind of multicoloured little perfume bottle, a key ring, right? It cost like €2 or something, right? But it just meant that I was thinking of her. And when I came back, I had this little gift, which she then anticipated and looked forward to. So lo and behold, when she had to allocate the rooms, right, I get the nicest rooms.
Well, there you go. I like that story for lots of reasons. And one of them is that it's about the little things.
Yeah.
It's just those small acts of consideration.
Yeah. Yeah. And she'd booked the flight, she'd booked the hotel, right? Yeah. So actually that experience going smoothly, right? Me not being stranded in the middle of Riyadh, right, without a car, that was really valuable to me. So it's sort of a way of saying thank you as well for making sure that bit of my life went better than it might have.
It reminds me of that thing that I've heard attributed to Richard Branson, which is that he will know the name of everyone in the office. He just takes the time to get to know the people who work for him. I don't know how true that is because obviously he's running multiple businesses of thousands of people, but there's something in that idea that you actually pay attention to the people. Yeah. Not just in your immediate circle, which was that's where Amir got stuck, was that he'd carved out this little circle where he was comfortable and let people in.
That's right.
But actually beyond that, if you see the world as hostile and you see people as cannon fodder, then you relate to them obviously based on that core pathogenic belief, as we talk about. Yeah, that's right. You used a tool with him. You used visualization as a tool, which I think is really interesting in this work. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, and it's always a bit risky using visualization because people think it's sort of a bit new age and cookie, but it can be very powerful.
And there's a lot of neuroscience that shows that the brain doesn't differentiate between a real experience and an imagined one, which is why sports people use visualization so much.
And if I ever do suggest a visualization, and I always offer it, and if somebody says I don't want to do that, I'll say I will say why, and we'll have a discussion around it. But if they don't want to do it, fine, right? It's up to them. But the argument I will always use is, if it's good enough for the captain of the England football team, maybe it's worth a shot, right? Little pun there. But yeah, so, and with Amir, we just got him to kind of go into a little trance state, which is very easy to do, right? You have to close, again, we're not going to do it, but you kind of close your eyes, breathe in a certain way, and you just take into a slightly different place. And then you can start to imagine, things. And in his case, if I'm remembering rightly, when we asked him to think about his dad, there was sort of hostility and anger and a bit of sadness, so that was harder for him to get to. But there was also fear, right? And it was very interesting because, of course, the last thing you would have thought about Amir was it was frightened of anybody, right? And it opened up a discussion about what had happened to him early on in life and how that might be connected to what he was like today that I'm not sure we would have got to without the visualization. Yeah.
Funnily enough, I just used a visualization this morning with a client and it was very powerful. Right. So, yeah, awesome. I corroborate that. I think they can feel a bit uncomfortable because they're a bit of an unknown quantity, but it's like using any new tool. I think offer the choice, and my experience is that they can really, as you say, take you to a deeper level. Yeah. Can we talk about empathy, which is on one of the rungs on the ladder of professional intimacy?
We exactly right. So professional intimacy you've asked about, and I've kind of avoided the question. I don't know why. I don't know why that tells us, right? So we have a model, and we've intentionally called it professional intimacy because people go, "Oh, intimacy," and especially in the Me Too world, right? obviously isn't anything to do with physical intimacy. It's about relational and emotional intimacy. And what's really interesting is that, and I won't go through the model because that's a reason for people to buy the book, right? But it's also on the CDP website, I think, so people can see it. It's got 7 levels, right? And when you're working with, for example, a team, or if you're doing stakeholder mapping and you're saying, well, when you're rating your relationship 0 to 10, right? It's one of those things where you think, well, okay, I kind of know how to do that. And then you think, well, hang on a minute, what am I rating? What is the kind of criteria of a good professional relationship, right? And so we try to break that down. And it's interesting because even people who think they're quite good at it and a team that thinks it's quite close will be at level like 2, possibly 3. So people are quite shocked to see that there is this deeper level. It goes back to something, of course, we were talking about on another episode about psychological safety, right? Which is very, very linked to this. But yeah, that's right. One of the levels includes empathy, right? You have to show empathy towards people. What is it really like to be them before you operate out of that clearly very powerful sense of what it's like to be you. You know what that is. It may be confusing and contradictory sometimes, but you kind of know what it is, right? You have access to it. To have empathy, you have to actually kind of quieten that and think, hang on a minute, what's it like maybe for this other person? So yeah, it's a very important thing. And of course, Amir showed no empathy to anybody, right?
Another rung on the ladder is openness.
Yeah.
As opposed to Amir's kind of default position, which is closed and guarded.
Yeah.
It seems obvious to me, but why is that important in terms of creating space to relate and strong professional relationships?
The mistake that people make when it comes to their professional relationships is that they're under the delusion that the person is relating to them as the boss or the person on the project or the direct report, right? Well, that is, I'm afraid, not how human beings work. You're always relating to the person, right? So somehow you have to manage this balance between respecting boundaries and roles, but also allowing the real you to be present in some way, right? And to be open about not just what you think, but also what you feel. Right, and it's very hard to do that for some people, right? It's quite hard for anybody to do it, right? But you do need to work out your own way of doing it, right? And some people will be a bit shy and more introvert than others, right? And a bit more emotionally withdrawn. But my challenge to people like that is, could you go a little bit further, right? You're going to come into the office suddenly one day and say, "Oh my God, I had the worst weekend ever. My husband's a bastard," right? No, right? But what could you do to show who you are? And of course, the classic work around this is Brené Brown and vulnerability. And that's what it is. It's making yourself vulnerable, which I'm afraid not only is part and parcel of who you are, and therefore you've got to kind of share to an extent as appropriate, but also it's the kind of supercharged nitro of relationship building, right? If I make myself vulnerable to you, you may make yourself vulnerable to me, right? And we deepen the relationship and we go up that ladder of professional intimacy, right?
And connected to this whole conversation about vulnerability and trust and creating that safety is authenticity.
Yeah.
It's kind of become a buzzword, hasn't it, in recent years? But I think it has for a reason.
That's right.
I think we're really shifting away from this sense that business, that this world of leadership is a kind of giant game of chess where you have to constantly have this mask on and don't show anyone who you really are and keep your home self separate from your work self. Everything's got a lot more blurry. Technology's made things a lot more blurry. But actually what's come with that is this understanding that it's really valuable to show people who you really are.
That's right.
And you're going to get further by being authentic, by being real and genuine. It doesn't mean if you're having a bad day, you come in and tell everyone about it, like you were saying. But it might mean that you do something to express some of that, just to let people know that you're human.
Yeah. And you make a really interesting point about technology, right? Because we're colleagues, we work together. I kind of think we quite like each other and we certainly respect each other, right? but I remember when for some reason, Facebook came up, and we had a little awkward moment of thinking. I was thinking, well, maybe Ella doesn't want me to join her Facebook. You know, that's got her kind of real friends on it, right? And so we had to kind of navigate that a bit. And in the end, she said, absolutely not.
It's not true.
It's not true. You allowed me in. You allowed me in, right?
I actually have a very small circle of people on Facebook,
Well,
so
no,
there we are.
I'm very grateful. But you're right. I think the question of masks is a really important one, right? And the question for me when I'm talking to people about this is not, do you sometimes have to put a mask on at work? Because of course you do. You actually, by the way, have to put on a mask with your friends and your partners and your children, right? So that idea of a mask is not like a terrible thing. We have various personalities, right, and things we want to share. The question for me is that, you know, have you got used to wearing that mask all the time? And why, right? And then if the answer is, well, at my work, I have to, with everybody all the time, I'm saying, okay, is that how you want to live? Is that how you want to be at work? Right? So it's not, you know, you should bare your soul to everybody at work. It's more questioning, how vulnerable can I be? How open can I be? How authentic can I be? And maybe pushing that dial a little bit forward.
And as Google found in their study of psychological safety and what created high-performing teams, when leaders and managers did show a bit more and they turned the dial up just a bit, the level of psychological safety and therefore productivity in their teams shot through the roof. And I think we have to remember that there's a very real, tangible business benefit to doing this.
That's right.
I just want to say, I think of it personally less as putting a mask on every day and a bit more as which parts of myself am I taking with me? And I think of it as kind of, I'm still me, but contextually, I show up in a slightly different way depending on the context and the relationship.
That's a good way of putting it.
So it's just metaphors, isn't it? And finding the metaphor.
Yeah. Hats off to Google, by the way, because again, if you start saying some of this stuff in a big corporate, right, you can be met with some resistance and skepticism, right? And, you know, it can be seen as kind of, you know, psychologically sort of touchy-feely bullshit, right? But you know, once you say, well, this has been investigated by Google, who spent several years and millions of dollars coming to an absolute cast iron conclusion that's been backed up by one of the top, Amy Edmondson, one of the top kind of professors of management at Harvard, people are willing to listen more, right? You shouldn't necessarily have to do that, right? But you're right. This is about performing better ultimately, right? It's not about anything else.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I'm wondering if there's anything that you would like to say to kind of sum up the whole chapter, because it is quite a meaty chapter and quite a big discussion.
Yeah, so there's a great quote actually, which is from Dale Carnegie, who wrote the famous book about how to win friends and influence people, who said, you can make more friends in 2 months by becoming interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you, right? So again, part of this thing we're talking about relating and connecting is not you going on about you. It's you showing interest in someone else, and it's when you do that, it has in many instances with many people a magical effect, you know. So yeah, lots in the chapter, but summed up by that, right? Show some interest.
Thanks, Derek.
Okay, cool.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really enjoying these episodes. Hope you are too, and look forward to you joining us for a future episode.